Benjamin Zephaniah, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. To start with, does your poetry change the world, or does it simply entertain people?
My poetry doesn't change the world. It does entertain people, and it changes people. And those people go on to change. And I've got like really good examples of how that's happened. The best one I like quoting is me performing in Dublin one day. After the performance, I was taking questions from the audience. I was talking about the importance of creativity and arts and poetry and education. And it was just a talk in the Parnell Mooney pub in Dublin. 15 years later or so, I was in South Africa. This guy came up to me and said, I remember seeing you in Dublin, and I loved that talk you did about education, the need for creativity and education. And he said, I've really taken that on board in the job that I do now. I said, what do you do? He said, I'm the Minister of Education. So, and he was sincere. He said it really made him think. He thought education was about, doing maths and simply being clever. And that talk in that pub that night changed his mind. And I got lots of other examples. So, I know that poetry is not going to change the world, but it changes individuals, and those individuals can go on to positions of influence.
Is it possible as well then to use poetry to promote serious political ends?
Of course. Again, I can give you lots of examples. I'm sorry for going back to South Africa. That's a great example.
Not at all,
if you go to Mandela and say, can poetry and music help change anything? He'll say, damn yes. Because it helped make people aware of his condition when he was in prison. And there's lots of other situations around the world where, in fact, if you look at a lot of regimes when they want to really come down on a people, one of the first things they start doing is like banning books or burning books and locking up the intellectuals and the poets and the thinkers and the playwrights, these people that really go out into the community and make an impression.
So would you say then that you have pretty strong political beliefs?
Pardon?
Would you say that?
Yeah, okay. Well, you see, I don't even think I'm political.
Not at all.
I just think that I care about things, and so I want to do something about it.
Isn't everything political?
Everything is political, in a sense. I suppose the problem is with a kid like me, from my background, is that I know that when I say my people, I mean all kinds of people, black, white, gay, straight, but people that come from the areas that I lived in, and you talk about politics, they think of a white man in a suit or a woman who is power dressed trying to be as manly as a man, and they don't think of how it affects the fact that they live in a terrible home and they're paying so much tax or whatever it is. They complain because of the price of fish and chips, and they think that, or they don't think about how the potatoes get there and how the fish gets there, etc., etc. So I guess I worry about using the word politics because it conjures up that image sometimes. But I realise that my poetry is always political in the general sense of the word. Bob Marley's work was really political, but if you ever suggested to him that he was political, he hated it.
Yes.
You see, it's our duty to speak up about our community. It's our duty, if we are artists and we have a platform, to talk about the conditions that we live in. If that's political, then so be it. But we don't do it to be political.
So then, if you did consider becoming a politician, you would change that sort of view of people. You could do it, couldn't you? You could change, as you said, a man in a suit, change that.
Well, you see, I don't think so. Look, the system, I know it's a general word, but the establishment is so entrenched. Their ways of doing things are just so well formed that people who are really passionate, who really care, who really want to stir it up, you don't see them. The politicians that I like seeing speak in the House and stuff like that, people like Skinner, they don't really have, they're MPs and they do great work in their community, but you never see them in the Foreign Office, kind of moulding Britain's foreign policy or anything like that. So, you know, this may sound like an odd thing to say, but I always try and be as honest as possible. I've said this many times, and I never quite understand why people don't get it. I think that people don't believe me. So, you know, they put me on the BBC and they put me on Question Time and stuff like this, as if I'm kind of willing to play that game. I mean, I will go on and talk, but deep down, I'm a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I actually, you know, if there was a political philosophy that I'm very close to, it would be an anarchist. And I know that most people don't understand what that is. They just think, and isn't anarchy just running wild and no control or anything like that? There's more to it than that. Here is not the time to go into that. But I believe that if people are empowered, really empowered and educated in how to take control of their lives, we would find less need for these men in suits who are so-called educated in controlling our lives, really. I mean, we don't trust them. People just don't know how to do it, and they don't trust themselves.
You were born in Birmingham, and at the age of 13, you left school unable to read or write.
Yeah, I didn't actually leave, but I mean...
So you stayed in school?
Well, no, they kicked me out. I mean, I did leave, but I didn't go, oh, one day I'm going to leave. They went, get out.
When you left, you couldn't read or write, but you were still making poetry and, as you say, playing with words. So how much influence did that period of your life, your teenage years, have in in moulding your creativity and your sort of literature?
Well, everything that I am and do now comes from that period. And one of the things that surprises me is that, you know, I'm 55 years old, going 56, and the passion and the anger and the energy for the work and the issues that I had then, I still have them now, because they're very basic. You know, it's just simply about me as a black man having the same rights as you as a white man, and you as a white man having the same rights as me, and all kinds of people just having the same opportunities. And I'm amazed, because people told me that I would be mellow by now, and I'm not mellowing. In some ways, I'm getting angrier and angrier, which I find a bit bizarre. I mean, I'm happy with it, and I just do what I do, but people who were supposed to know about these things told me that it wouldn't be like this. So those years are very important, because I didn't know any people who were really political. I certainly didn't know any politicians. I didn't know the word sometimes for the issues that I was passionate about.
Yeah.
I just felt it. It was instinctive in me. And that's one thing I'm proud of. I remember one day somebody said to me, you know, I made some statement and somebody said, where did you study your Marxism? And I was like, what's Marxism? You know, and they gave me this whole thing about Karl Marx and stuff like that. And I went, no, it was a police station in Birmingham, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. As a young man, you served a prison sentence for burglary. Did that, or does it still, sort of influence who you are today?
Well, when I was in prison, the only literature we were allowed was the Bible. This may sound strange, and I'm not saying this for a laugh, or pornography. There was nothing in between. I always found that really odd. You know, we didn't have a library. There was no educational program or anything like that. You're allowed the Bible and pornography. I'm convinced that they thought that both things would pacify us, you know.
Yeah.
So what I did do was a lot of thinking. I didn't, you know, try and read the Bible. I didn't do pornography. So I just did a lot of thinking. And when I left that prison, I remember telling an officer who said he'll give me 6 months and I'll be back. I remember saying to him, I might be back, but next time it'll be political rather than criminal. Because I sat in that prison cell and I thought, burglary, robbery, and I think I'm fighting the system. And although I used to have a bit of a Robin Hood attitude to my crime, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, I still thought, to a certain extent, the people who I was robbing weren't really rich. They just lived on a nicer part of town.
What would you say to them now, if you could say to those people who own the house or wherever?
Well, I would say, first of all, this shows you that sometimes locking people up and throwing away the key is not a good approach, that you should give people room for reform and for repentance, if you like, and that I did those crimes because I was desperate and poor and everything, and I still have a problem with people who just sit on their riches and don't do anything to help the poor. So I would say to them, come and help me fight for the poor. Let's, get rid of poverty.
Would you say then, when you were young?
I would also apologise, by the way. I should say that, it's not as, it's not just me reading a manifesto to them. Sorry.
No, not at all. Would you say then, in that period when you were fairly young, that your relationship with your parents and 7 siblings was positive?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I come from a very religious family, so, the church didn't like what I was doing, and therefore, my parents. I was separated for a long time from a lot of my other brothers and sisters, but they all did quite well. I think I have one brother who has a criminal record, and he took the police to court and won them, sued them, because it was a complete frame-up and he got beat up.
Yeah.
So in a sense, I mean, I'm the only one of, there's actually 9 of us altogether, who has a police record. So Mum didn't do too bad, really. If it's, if you're going to look at, is it about the way your parents raised you? Actually, the most important influence was the gang that I was involved in. When I got kicked out of school, I started hanging out with other kids that were kicked out of school. And we needed to go places. And to go places, we needed money. That's probably the most important thing. I meet kids now who are at the same school as me, and I say, do you smoke? And they go, well, no. Why? Because I was hanging out with a group of kids that didn't smoke. And sometimes it can just be as arbitrary as that. Kids who are kind of artistic or nerdy or whatever, and they group together. I just happened to get together with a group of kids that were, into crime. And it was really odd sometimes because, I'd be doing crime and I'd be thinking about how I would include this in literature,
Yeah.
But that was life.
There was a period later on in your life where you visited war zones and religious sites, but you said that doing that made you less religious, but you became closer to God, and that religion perhaps gave God a bad name. So why is that?
Well, why is what? Why is it with me, or why is it that religion gives God a bad name?
Yeah. Why do you think that, first of all?
Well, look at the evidence. Some of the most religious institutions in the world are now not simply accused of, but found to be kind of hideouts for paedophiles. Some of these very same institutions deny not just, as if, I'm not saying it's not important, not just the rights to be bishops or things like that, but just other basic rights. Even the right to control their contraception, their birth control. And look at the wars, and if you look at any religion, I mean, most religions deep down talk about peace and unity and coming together. Yet the way they are manifested in the real world is like, we are the chosen few and we are better than you. I think people need religion to kind of try and explain the world, try and explain why we are here and where we come from and where we're going, etc. But I also believe that before religion, we were able to, And this may sound a bit wishy-washy, and I normally wouldn't talk about this because this is about pure experience. If you learn to meditate, if you learn to get in touch with yourself, then you can get in touch with God. That has nothing to do with the church. That has nothing to do with preachers. That has nothing to do with someone's ability to read a holy book and preach and convert. That's just you. When human beings lost that ability, we then started to rely on all these experts. It's exactly what we do with politics. We can take control of our lives. We can get together in our communities and say what we should be growing, what we should be eating and stuff like that. But we've lost that confidence, so we give it to other people to guide us. The human being is a very powerful, creative being, but sometimes they just don't know how powerful and independent and creative they can be. It's very sad sometimes.
And do you sort of hope to help people understand that? Or don't you think that that's your role, or is that the role of other people, or how do we get that message across, do you think?
Well, look, in my work as a poet, I know that I get people to think about issues. I know sometimes I change people's minds. I know sometimes I get people thinking about things that they never thought of, or thinking about things that they thought of but in a completely different way. But let me tell you something about Benjamin Zephaniah. One of the most important things I do is I study Tai Chi and kind of moving meditations. And it's when I teach people that. That is quite amazing, because it's not just a kind of political awakening that happens, it's a kind of enlightenment that happens. And they have confidence, I know that in my work as a poet, I have saved people's lives. I've met people that said, this poem saved my life. But I know in my work as a martial arts instructor, I have definitely changed people's lives. I'm in touch with those people almost every day. And that's work that no one sees. I'm just passionate about martial arts, not because I like fighting, it's because it's all about the breathing and the self-control and the discipline and the meditation.
Do you do that in China predominantly?
Well, I do it every day.
You do it everywhere?
I do it every day.
So,
I practice, but I do study in China.
So when you're not teaching in London, you balance sort of, I think, your time between where you live here in Lincolnshire and Beijing. So what's the relationship between the two there? Why China?
Actually, it was just the love of martial arts that drew me there.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating place. I mean, everybody thinks of it as this kind of communist state where there's a lack of freedom of movement and all that stuff. Let me tell you, I've learned more about capitalism since being in China than any time in my life, because it's raw, naked capitalism. It's kind of honest capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends in China who, English friends who have lived there for 15 years or so, that will tell me that they don't have any Chinese friends, because there's a lot of the people there are so capitalistic that if they have a relationship with you, it's got to be one based on money. And if you've got no purpose for me, why should I? It's not like in England where, I can be your friend because you support Aston Villa and so do I. You do, don't you?
Portsmouth, but I do remember when I was at Villa Park and Pompey were right, 3-0.
Okay, let's not talk about that. But you know what I mean? We're so used to forming relationships just based on the clothes we wear or something like that. Whereas in China, everything seems to be about profit, and it's a change from what it used to be. And in fact, I've met politicians in China who are almost embarrassed about using the word communist now. They use it because of kind of respect for the revolution and all that stuff, and the people who were alive through that time. But it's a real capitalist system. And it's interesting because I learn a lot about humankind there, and I've never seen change happen so quickly than I do there, and that's why I find it interesting.
Going back to your poetry for a moment, it is very modern, obviously, compared to the classics like Shakespeare and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, but do you still enjoy reading and teaching those classics?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. It's a bit like a painter who, I mean, I did hear about a painter whose name I won't mention, one of these new British artists who did a painting that some multimillionaire bought,
Right.
put it on the wall, and it kind of started flaking because they didn't know how to, I'm not sure what the word is, but prime the canvas,
Okay.
kind of thing. If you don't know the roots and foundation of the antecedents of what you're doing, then I think you're kind of shadow boxing. When people come to me, for example, and they talk about rhyme, because they know I'm very much into rhyme, and putting meaning into the poetry at the same time. For example, I'm not sure if you call it classic, I certainly would. I turn to Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gently into that Good Night, for example, because it's brilliant rhyming scheme. There's not a word wasted. You know, it's just packed with meaning. It's passionate. It's about his father dying. It's telling his father to live. You know, and I'll do that with a rapper or somebody who wants to do modern performance poetry, because Dylan Thomas, when he was writing his poetry, said it to make sure that it worked in performance. If somebody wants to talk to me about politics and poetry, and again, passion as in trying to get the word out there and wake people up, I'll talk about Shelley.
You said there that Thomas didn't waste a word. Is that an important skill, being concise and succinct? And if not, why should we use more words than necessary in our everyday lives?
Well, we should use words. We should. It's not a matter of should or shouldn't
Okay.
we. Some great poetry is, for me, is when I look at the poem and I think there's not a word wasted. You know, it's just perfect. But there are other poems where, for the sake of the rhythm and playfulness, you may want to just do that.
Yeah.
If you look at my collections of poetry, there's all kinds of influences in there. I like talking about something really modern, but writing it in a kind of poetic metre that's really old. I like that juxtaposition sometimes, or writing in a very old form, but doing it in a very Jamaican style.
Yeah.
We can do that. That's the great thing about multicultural Britain. We've got all these influences now. I love parodying stuff. So, you know, Shakespeare said to be or not to be. I said to free or not to free. That is the question.
Yes.
You know. I don't think one is better than the other, but I think you should be aware of it all. One of the things that I find a bit frustrating sometimes, when somebody comes to me and they show me a piece of poetry and they think that they're being really original. And I can say, no, Kipling did this years ago, you know. And they think, oh, yeah? And I showed them this obscure Kipling poem and they go, God, now you can still do it, but you've got to bring something new to it.
Yeah. In 100 years' time, then, people will still be enjoying Shakespeare. Will they still be enjoying Zephaniah?
I don't know. I really don't know. You see, I'm the first one to admit that, you know, the great thing about my poetry is the performance of it. Yeah. That's where it's best. Writing it down is a bit of a compromise. You know, I am one of the few performance poets that has managed to understand the craft of writing poetry down. But who knows, there may be a political change and all my books get burnt. I don't know. But
that's how you started, isn't it, performing your poems?
Yes, yeah. So I wanted to publish poetry in people's hearts rather than on a book, and I realised that when I'm gone, that's going to be difficult to keep up. But in the age of film and all that stuff, I would hope that even if my books didn't survive, that evidence of my performances survived. Even though when I look at my performances on YouTube or whatever, I don't think anything really captures them like being in the audience.
In the moment.
Yeah. Is, you know, there's nothing like it. Well, there must be something like it, but you know.
Just want to touch on this. In the 60s and 70s, there was a great appetite amongst the youth for changing the world. And do you think now, do you think that there are less campaigns and protests? And B, if yes, do you think that's because people are just simply happier with their lives?
It's a very interesting question. I think there are many reasons why we don't see young people engaged in politics in a way that they were a long time ago. Some people care very passionately about things. What frustrates me is that, and I think this may be part of the answer, that sometimes people don't see the connections. So you have people campaigning against fracking in Britain. But I think those people should also be campaigning about the way that a certain oil company is doing business in Nigeria, for example, especially the international connection. I think that there are obviously lots of distractions. I don't want to sound like an old fart now and I talk about, there's people who do stuff on Facebook, because Facebook and Twitter has helped organise lots of protests. But I do think that people are just not angry enough. I think it's because there is real poverty in this country, but you don't see people starving like you do in some of the developing countries. And a lot of people feel a disconnect from that, which is really odd in this time when we should be more connected. It's a really difficult one. It frustrates me sometimes, but I do get lots of people, certainly lots of my students in my universities, some of them are not my students, they're engineering students, and they come in and knock on my door and they say, I don't know where to go. I do feel like I want to do something, but where do I go? I think that there is a need for a kind of internationalist political party that looks at things globally, that can look at all the issues in various countries and see how they connect globally, and kind of build a campaign or a movement which has a kind of global view. And I know two people who I think are capable of leading that movement.
And who are they?
They are Arundhati Roy,
right,
and Noam Chomsky. But by definition, they wouldn't do it because they don't want leadership positions, and there's a great thing about them. But
that's an interesting question in itself, though. Should power be given to those who don't want it? Or in the current sort of political setup we have in this country, power is given to those who do want it?
Yes. It's very sad, I've just come from Taiwan, which a place I've never been to, and China claims it. And America protects them from China. And you've got people in Taiwan who claim China, and there's all this kind of going on. And I was listening to all the arguments, and then one day, just very casually, as we were driving past the mountain, somebody said, oh, up there we have the tribal people living, the Aboriginal people. I said, what? They said, yeah, we have the original people of this island. Nobody cares for them because they don't have big armies, they don't seek power. They're like the Aboriginals of Australia. It's about their relationship with the land, it's about their relationship with the mountains. Their culture doesn't allow them to have a Mandela. And I thought to myself, gosh, it's a shame that the people who are peaceful, the people who just want to live in peace and don't seek power, are the people that get walked over. It's a sad state of affairs. They say might is right. And unfortunately, in practical terms, it is. That's what wins.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
And I suppose moving on from that, one of, a big issue, a big contemporary issue today is that of same-sex marriage and being gay. And you've spoken a lot about the homophobia in Jamaica. But in the UK, would you say that it's a good place to be, to be openly gay, or do you think that still now there is still prejudices and discrimination against?
I think it's a better place to be gay, and I think there is still prejudice, but I'm not gay, so I don't know. I would feel, if a white guy sat down and told me there's a better place to be black, I would say, what do you know?
Yeah. But
just today, I got racism in a petrol station as I was coming here. I met a comedian who was performing here the other day, and he said he got his first blast of racism for a long time. So I don't know what it's like today being gay living in Britain. But yeah, I can see that some laws have moved forward and there's been lots of progress. But, you know, I think there's still a long way to go.
You've said on a number of occasions that one of your biggest fears is growing old alone.
Yeah, it is.
Would you consider remarrying then, do you think?
Oh, gosh. I guess I would. It is my biggest fear, growing old alone. Yeah. I do love being alone, but I realise it's not a good place to be as you get older. And I see people who are very old on their own, and it's very difficult for them. You need, human beings, we are pack animals, you know, we need companionship, we groom each other, we hug each other. So I probably would, you know. The thing is, before I got married in my first marriage, as you know, which didn't work out. I mean, it was a good marriage. We just grew apart. But before that, if you'd asked me about marriage, I would have said, actually, I didn't believe in marriage really. I thought it was all about ownership of females and stuff like this. And then you fall in love, you see.
Yeah.
And when you fall in love, there's nothing you can do about it. So I can't sit here and say I will or I won't, you know. I have to fall in love. You know, at the moment, I just eat a lot of chocolate. And when I find a girl that tastes as good as chocolate, I'll be getting married, right? I'll tell you something, you know. Sorry, am I talking too much?
Not at all.
A friend of mine came to me not so long ago.
Yeah.
And he said, do you know this girl on here? I said, yeah. He said, oh man, I'm in love with her.
Yeah.
I said, that's really cool. He said, no, it's not cool, man. It's really bad. I said, what's the problem? She got a boyfriend? He went, no. But he said, I don't like white girls. I said, you do? You're in love. And I had to try to explain to him, that's what love is. Yeah. You know, sometimes you can't explain it. You can't just write down, I like black girls, or I like white girls, or I like girls with, you know, legs or whatever. You fall in love and you fall in love, and that's it.
As a patron of the vegan society, do you think the government should be doing more to promote the consumption of non-meat products?
Yes. I mean, I could talk a long time about the damage that meat does to people. The hospitals are full with people who have got diseases because of over-consuming meat.
Should meat be banned altogether?
Well, you know, in my opinion, meat is murder. But that's another thing. You see, I'm not going to do that stuff now.
Yeah.
I can if you want, but just think, who is promoting the carrot? You know, it's one of the things that we grow here. It's got so much goodness in it, you know, and you can think about the potato and the leek and all kinds of vegetables that we grow here. Who is doing mass campaigns on the television for them? Those are the things that we should be eating more. Those things should look sexy and should have stars promoting them. Because we know that if we eat more of those, we will spend less time in hospitals. We will spend less time missing days at work and stuff like this. So it's a very practical thing. You know, I could do the heavy vegan lecture, but even just on a common sense, you know. But who is promoting vegetables in our country? Nobody. Few vegetarians and vegans.
You turned down your OBE offer because one of the reasons you despise the notion of empire. For me, that was pretty evident in some of your early poetry, and it seems extraordinary that you were considered for the honour. What was your initial reaction to being offered that OBE?
Shock. I just thought, who could... They haven't read my work, I thought, you know. I don't know if you read the rejection kind of piece that I wrote in The Guardian, but I can't remember word for word, I'm paraphrasing, but I said, you know, at that time I'd hardly written any poetry. I'd been campaigning against the war, I'd been campaigning for animal rights, been campaigning to eat more vegetables. Nobody offered me an OBE for that. You know, and my cousin had died in a police station not long before. I mean, those are the things I was complaining about. They didn't offer me an OBE for that. I challenged the people that offered me the OBE for poetry to name the last poem that I wrote. Yeah? And in fact, in the last collection of poems that I wrote, Too Black, Too Strong, the first poem, Bought and Sold, is a critique of people who accept, or creative people, who get in bed with the state.
The alternative then to a monarchy or the royal family would presumably be some sort of presidency. Who would you nominate, or who would you like to see as president?
You know, I'm not going to do that game, because I don't think it has to be a president.
So what would you say? Is there an
alternative? I think we can find an alternative. You know, it really gets me when people say that if we don't have a king or a queen, then we have to have a president.
So we don't at all, or there is another alternative?
I'm not an expert in this, but I'm sure we could come up with another way.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could come up with another way. If we lose unfortunately, I've just seen this happen not so long ago with a family of mine, some friends of mine who have a very structured kind of family, and they lost the head of the family, and they were like, well, you know, who's going to be head of the family now? What man is going to lead the family? I said, find another way. Find a way that works for you as a family. We can find a new way that works for us as a nation. And I don't know what it is, but that's the point. You know, I'd get in conversation with people that also feel like me. We want to find another way. That's the way to do it.
And finally, Benjamin, I wonder if you could make up a poem for us.
Make up a poem for you?
From scratch.
Oh, not really. I mean, I could make up something, but you could probably make up something better.
What about reciting one? And
reciting one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I could recite one. It's a very short one, because I know you've got a bus to catch.
A train.
And I want to do it to the camera. It's called Who's Who. I used to think nurses were women. I used to think police were men. I used to think poets were boring, until I became one of them.
That is absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Benjamin. I really do appreciate you coming in.
No problem.
Cheers, man.
Peace.